Good evening. We want to welcome you to our Wednesday night service tonight. Delighted that you're with us through live stream. We'll be talking about creation and the laws of science. Kyle always does an excellent job, as all of our speakers have from Apologetics Press, and I know you'll look forward to hearing him tonight. And continue to be with us as we go through this quarter all the way through August, and different speakers from Apologetics Press will be with us each Wednesday night. But we invite you to listen to Kyle as he speaks to us tonight. And before he speaks, if you will, let's bow together and we'll have a word of prayer. Our Father and our God in heaven, we're grateful for the opportunity that we have of being able to gather tonight through the live streaming in our homes as we open your word together and listen to another lesson from your word. And we're thankful, Father, for the week that you've given to us, and we ask you to continue to be with us this week, be with the leaders of our country, be with us that this virus might soon be under control or to be able to go away. And Father, we ask you to be with us tonight and help us to be good, attentive, and active listeners. And we thank you, Father, so much for the hope that you give to us in your Son, Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen.
In the beginning was matter, and matter begot the amoeba begot the worm begot the fish begot the amphibian begot the reptile begot the lower mammal begot the lemur begot the monkey begot the man who imagined God. This is the genealogy of man. That is almost a verbatim quote from a man by the name of Charles Smith from 1928. I've been using that quote for years, and it's been around almost for 100 years now. But what I find so very interesting is that in a nutshell, that encapsulates the concept of evolution, and as it's tied to atheism. Naturalistic evolution that claims there is no God, there's nothing supernatural, and everything that we see in this world came from chance, random processes over multiplied billions of years. Now, that has been added to with lots of, and I'm going to put this in quotations because I don't believe this really is what it claims to be, with lots of scientific information such as the Big Bang. And what we're told is some 13.82 billion years ago, there was a tiny singularity, and that singularity exploded in what is called the Big Bang. And that Big Bang, then somehow after the initial explosion, everything in the universe sped up faster than the speed of light in something called inflation, and then it began to slow down and stars began to coalesce out of the materials that came from that initial explosion, and that our world, coming from a gravitational connection from our Earth coalescing out of space dust, being pulled around the sun, which was supposedly created in a similar way, and that then life somehow evolved on this planet from non-living chemicals, and those non-living chemicals gave rise to life, and that single-celled original life then multiplied into all of the other kinds of life that we see. And we're told that that is the scientific explanation for how our universe originated. A huge explosion, and that explosion bringing about everything, and then life coming from non-living chemicals, and that life changing from one kind of life to another kind of life. And there again, supposedly that's the scientific idea. Now, some people in our country believe that. But there's another idea that people believe. And that I think if you're watching this, you probably are one of those people that believe another idea. Similar statement at the beginning, in the beginning, but it veers in a totally different direction than the other statement. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God divided the light from the darkness, and the light He called day, the darkness He called night. And evening and morning, day one. And then subsequently, the second day, where He made the expanse. The old King James says the firmament, something that was the atmosphere and space above the planet Earth. And then day three, the flowers, grass, and trees. And He told those flowers and grass and trees and all of the plants to be fruitful and multiply after their own kind. And then day four, the sun, moon, and stars. And day five, the birds and fish. Day six, the land-living creatures and humans. And on day seven, stopping or ceasing His creative activity. Now, there are basically, in a nutshell, your two ideas. There's no God, and everything is here because of random chance processes from an initial huge explosion, and all life organisms came from a single cell, and it expanded into the various different organisms that we have. Or God spoke the world into existence. Now, we're told one of those is scientific and one of those is a faith-based belief. And we're told that the Big Bang idea is the scientific one, and the idea about God creating things is the faith-based, and that if you want to have a faith-based, that's fine for you, but it doesn't really match, it doesn't really mesh with what we know to be accurate and modern and scientific. And if you really want to just follow the evidence where it leads, then you'll go over here to this Big Bang, no supernatural existence from blind random chance processes over multiplied millions of years. However, if we take a step back and say, are there scientific laws that we can analyze that would actually help us verify which of these two ideas is really scientific? And what I mean by that really corresponds to the physical reality that we see in this world and in the universe. Are there laws that would help us understand which of these two is true? Well, there are. In fact, there are certain scientific laws that absolutely nail down the validity of one of these ideas and absolutely preclude the possibility of the other idea. And let's work on that. There's a fundamental law. It's the singular, most often used law in science. In fact, you couldn't do science without it. You couldn't do experimental scientific discovery without this single law. It's called the law of cause and effect, or the law of causality, which means and is stated that every material effect in the universe has a cause which came before it or was simultaneous to it, and which is greater than it. Now, that doesn't seem like that big of a law as far as hard to understand. Okay, when you see something happen, the first thing that you want to know is what caused it. We use it in every single experiment that is done in science. When you see that someone is sick, what do you ask yourself? Well, what caused them to get sick? Did they come in contact with a germ? Is it some type of physiological situation? When you see something that has polluted a certain stream, well, what caused that pollution? Was it from a factory? Was it from something that was coming out of the ground naturally? What caused that? Every scientific experiment ever done is done based on the idea that there is a legitimate cause to every single physical material effect in the universe, in existence today. And you say, okay, Kyle, we appreciate that. How does that help us? Well, here's what we understand about scientific laws. They're not up for a vote. It's not as if people change scientific laws. Why is a matter of discussion deemed a scientific law? Here's why. There's never been a single instance in the history of the human endeavor that has shown it to have a single exception. That's why it's a law. If there ever were a single exception to it, ever once, it would no longer be called a law. And so you've got the law of causality, the law of cause and effect, and it says that for every material effect you see in this universe, there is a cause that came before it or was simultaneous to it and is greater than it. Now let's compare that law to the two concepts that we have been given as to how the universe got here, God speaking the world into existence, or the world coming to existence from a tiny singularity that was supposedly a bit of something that was smaller than a period at the end of a sentence and exploding into this universe that we see. Let's compare that law of cause and effect. You know, if I were to be standing in front of you, or just in front of this camera, and I said all of a sudden, as I was speaking, this camera got taken off of its tripod, the screen went blank, and you were wondering what caused that. Well, that'd be a good discussion. We would want to know what caused that. And here's what I said. We got the camera all fixed up, and I said, here's what happened, guys. I was standing in front of this camera, and from the right, there was a clock on the wall that shot across the room at 100 miles an hour and crashed into the camera, knocked it off the tripod, and that's what happened. And you then said to me, what caused the clock to shoot off the wall and slam into the camera? And I said, oh, nothing. Sometimes clocks just fly off walls and slam into cameras for no reason. There's no physical causation that occurred there. It just happens. Well, what would you think about that? Would you think I had any understanding of the scientific endeavor? No, because every one of us want to know if a clock flew off the wall and slammed into the camera, we want to know the cause of that. Now, when you start looking at the universe and this tiny singularity that supposedly existed and then blew up into the Big Bang, the first question that we would ask is, what caused that tiny singularity, the existence of that first stuff? And do you know what the answer we're given to what caused that? Is basically it popped into existence from nothing. It just appeared. There was nothing before it, and boom. That tiny singularity just came into existence from nothing. And do you know that is a fundamental violation of the law of cause and effect that says in this material universe, every single physical material effect has a cause that came before it or simultaneous to it and was greater than it. But somehow at the beginning of it all, we're going to suggest that that first singularity just popped into existence from nothing? You wouldn't let me suggest that a clock shot across the wall with no cause. How in the world are we going to suggest that the original stuff that formed the universe just popped into existence from nothing? Now, it's not rocket surgery, folks. If we ask the question, if there ever were a time when there was absolutely nothing, what would you have now? Nothing. Material doesn't pop into existence from nothing. Nothing comes from nothing. Nothing ever could, from the lyrics of the song that is so well known. You can't get something from nothing. Do you know that Big Bang idea is in direct violation to the most fundamental law of science, and that is the law of cause and effect? Now, when you nail that down, lots of times, the person who's thinking through this realizes, okay, well, hold on just a second. What are you saying was the cause of the universe? And I'm saying that there's a supernatural God who spoke the world into existence. And so the next question, and it's a very good question, what caused God? If you say that everything has a cause, then what caused God? Well, we didn't say everything had a cause. In fact, let's back that up and ask what we did say. In the physical universe, in the material universe, every physical material effect has a cause that came before and that was greater than it. See, when we look at the world around us, we can know what stuff does. But we can also know that there had to be something that didn't act material, that didn't act like physical stuff. And so lots of times when you talk to a person who believes in the Big Bang and this idea that there was a singularity, what they will just say is, well, the physical laws didn't apply to that first stuff. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, yes, every physical entity has to have a cause that came before it and that was greater than it, but that first stuff didn't act like that. Oh. So you mean the first stuff acted not like matter? Yeah. Like it was more than matter. Like it was super matter. Like it was supernatural. You see, we have nailed down the law of cause and effect because we've studied physical entities and we know that all physical effects have to have a cause. But we also know that there's got to be something that was at the beginning that didn't act like anything material. It acted bigger than material. It acted more than material. It acted outside of the laws of matter. You see, when you say God spoke into existence the world, you're presenting a supernatural explanation. And the fact is, a supernatural explanation is the only truly scientific explanation that there is, because what everybody admits is we've got a physical universe that has to have a cause, but it couldn't have created itself, and it couldn't have popped into existence from nothing, and so we've got to get something that will not act like matter. In the beginning, God is the only scientific explanation that will account for that. And so when you start looking at that idea of a universe that pops into existence from nothing, it's just simply impossible. Scientifically, it's impossible. You can't get it. It's kind of like the old joke where the engineer was looking at the world and he thought he could do a better job, and he said to God somehow in this conversation, he said, God, I just don't think that you have done the greatest job on the universe, and I think I could do a better job. And God condescendingly looked down at him and he said, you think you could do a better job? And the engineer said, yeah, I believe I could do a better job. And God said, okay, we'll have a contest. You create your universe, I'll create my universe, and we'll see which one's better. And the engineer was excited with the prospect, and he reached down and he grabbed some dirt and he started, and God said, hold on just a second. You have to get your own dirt. Well, what's the point of that old joke? Well, the point of the joke is that you don't get to start with something from a naturalistic perspective. If there was nothing, then there is nothing. But there's something. And that means there had to be some type of creator or creating substance that didn't act like matter. It had to be supernatural. And the only entity that could accurately, scientifically represent that would be a supernatural creator who is not of the same nature as the stuff we study on a regular basis. So you've got the law of cause and effect. The first aspect of it says you can't get something from nothing. You can't get a clock to fly across the wall and slam into a camera without a cause. Now let's go to the second aspect of that. Well, the second aspect of it's fairly simple. It just says that the cause has to be greater than the effect. Not hard to understand. Cause has to be greater than the effect. We understand that in virtually every single interaction we have with the world on a regular basis. Now, suppose I said, okay, that camera smashed and we put it back up and we were filming again, and I said, okay, clock flew off the wall, slammed into the camera, and one of you said, well, what caused it? And this time I said, well, I'm not going to say nothing caused it because we all know something did. This time what caused that was there was a tiny fleck of paint on the wall that fell off that wall, and it hit that clock and launched the clock 100 miles an hour toward the camera and smashed the camera. Well, hold on just a second. A tiny fleck of paint falling off the wall doesn't shoot a clock at 100 miles per hour. You know, if we said there's a guy who's driving up an interstate, maybe he's in a UPS truck, and this particular guy somehow comes to a screeching halt, does 3 flips, and ends up in the ditch. What caused that? And well, you're driving by in this situation and you are pulling over, you see him. Thankfully, he's not hurt, so you go up to him and you say, hey, buddy, are you okay? He says, yeah, I'm okay, but you got to get everybody off the road. You say, why? He said, well, they're everywhere. I saw one about 25 yards in front of me, but I couldn't stop. You turn back to the road and you start looking, what did you see? And he said, I was going 65 miles an hour and there's no way I could have avoided. It was the biggest mosquito. I bet it was the size of a quarter, and it slammed into the front of my truck and caused me to do 3 flips. Does a mosquito slamming into the grill of a semi-truck and trailer cause it to do 3 flips? No, the cause is not big enough. Now, what are we told brought this universe into existence? A tiny ball of something that virtually popped into existence from nothing. And that ball of something, when you say, well, okay, well, how big was it? About 10 to the negative 26 centimeters across, depending on who you ask and what entity is presenting this information. A tiny ball of stuff smaller than a period at the end of a sentence. Is that what you're saying? Yes. And it brought into existence what? Our entire universe. Now, how big is our entire universe? Now, that is a fun question to explore. And let me tell you what I mean by a fun question to explore. We don't have any idea. The estimations for how big our universe is, they change almost on a daily basis. If you've tried to keep up with the scientific writing on how big our universe is, you can't do it. And here's why you can't do it, because we don't have measuring techniques that will give us any real type of concrete explanation as to how big our universe is. But I'm going to put it into some perspective for us. If you were just to say, you know, how many stars are there in the one galaxy where we live? We live in the Milky Way galaxy. Of course, I've always loved the Milky Way galaxy. We got the galaxy that's named after a candy bar. You know, there are other galaxies like the Andromeda Galaxy or Galaxy GX304. They got some numeric name. We've got the Candy Bar Galaxy, which has always been fun for me from the time I was a little kid. I always thought, oh, it's named after a candy bar. Well, the Milky Way Galaxy, how many stars are there estimated to be in the Milky Way Galaxy? Well, several years ago, they said there are about 100 billion stars in the Milky Way Galaxy. 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Now let's put that number into perspective. Suppose you wanted to count to 100 billion. How long would that take you? Well, if you counted to 10,000 every single day. Don't know why you would want to count to 10,000 every single day. Often as I discuss this information, I talk about when one of my children was about, I'm going to say he was about 5. He got up one morning, it was a Saturday. Sometimes he would get up earlier than we would. And I asked him, I said, what'd you do this morning? He said, well, I counted. I said, what'd you count? He said, nothing, just counted. I said, what'd you count to? He said, well, I counted to 3,000. You ever got up on a Saturday morning? Some light streaming in, it's about 6 o'clock, and you think, you know, I think I'll count today. Well, not me. Never really felt like counting to 3,000, but what I have found out as I have talked to smaller children across the nation about that particular idea, some of them come up and say, well, sometimes I get up and count to 3,000 or 5,000. What if you got up and counted to 10,000 every day for one day? And then for 2, and then for 3, and for a whole week. That'd get you what, 70,000. And then for a month, and then for a year, and then for 10 years, and 20 years. In 30 years, and then as long as you lived, you counted to 10,000 every single day. Do you know how long it would take you to count to 100 billion? It would take you over 27,000 years, counting 10,000 a day, to count to 100 billion. 27,000 years. Now, of course, you don't have that kind of time, and neither do I. 10,000. Now, think about this. If every single one of those numbers represented a star, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, every one that you rattle off as fast as you can rattle them off represents a star. Well, now, how big are the stars? You know, they say our sun is a middle-sized star. And you can take 1 million Earths and fit those inside the sun. So, million Earths fit inside the sun. Our sun is a middle-sized star. There are some stars out there that are some 1,400 times bigger than our sun. And so you could take 1,400 million Earths and put them inside some of those bigger stars. So you're looking at 1.4 billion Earths or so that you could put inside some of those bigger stars. Our sun is a middle-sized star. And there are 100 billion of those in the Milky Way galaxy, and every one you count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, represents a star. Well, I say 100 billion, which would take you 27,000 years to count to if you're counting 10,000 every single day. But then you got to take a real quick step back and say that's what they thought for a long time. They estimated 100 billion. And then I think it was maybe 5 years ago, maybe 4, they came out and said, you know what, we've got the calculation of the Milky Way galaxy all wrong. The real calculation of the Milky Way galaxy is, we think 3 or 400 billion stars. We were off by 3 or 4 times because we didn't calculate for the space dust, etc. So we think there are 300, let's take the conservative estimate of 300 billion stars in our Milky Way galaxy. 300 billion? Now think about that. We went from 100 billion, which was a massive number, to now 300 billion. Now it's going to take you, over 70,000 years to count to the number 300 billion, counting 10,000 every day, and every one of those numbers represents a star. Now that is something. Oh, and that's in one galaxy. How many galaxies do they estimate there are? Well, they estimate right now that there are over 100 billion galaxies, and I dare say if you keep up with the literature, you're going to see that they're going to tell you that there are going to be more than 100 billion galaxies in the future, but that's where they're telling us we are right now. So there are 100 billion galaxies that each one of them, and from what I understand, our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, though it has probably the best name of any galaxy, it's a middle-sized galaxy, fairly average. It's got, over 300 billion stars maybe? And it's a fairly average galaxy. So we've got 100 million galaxies, each of which on average might have 100 billion galaxies, each of which might have 300 billion stars. Are you starting to get the head spin yet? The astronomical numbers of what we're dealing with? Well, how big's our galaxy? Well, if you were to start on one side of our galaxy, let's just say that there was an end of the galaxy over here, the Milky Way galaxy, and the end of the galaxy over here, and you could travel the speed of light. Now, the speed of light is 300,000 kilometers a second, but in mileage, it'd be about 186,000 miles per second. 186,000 miles per second is 7 times around the equator of the globe in 1 second. If you were to count one Mississippi, that's how fast light can go around the equator of our planet in 1 second. You're on this end of the galaxy and you're going to this end, and you can travel the speed of light. Do you know how many years you're going to have to fly to get across our one galaxy? To get across our one galaxy, you're not going to have to fly for 100 years. Traveling the speed of light. Not 1,000 years, not 10,000 years, not 50,000 years. You have to fly for 100,000 years, going 186,000 miles per second to get across our one galaxy. And there are an estimated 100 billion galaxies. Now let's go back to our law of cause and effect, and it says that every material effect we have, this universe, we know it's a material effect, can't argue with that, has a cause that came before it, couldn't have popped into existence for nothing, and was greater than it. What is bigger than a universe that has 100 billion galaxies, each of which could contain 300 billion stars? Well, let's go a little further. For many years, they suggested to us that the universe, if you were to start on this side of the universe, now not the galaxy, the universe, and you were to fly to this side of the universe, traveling the speed of light, it would take you over 46 million years, going 186,000 miles per second. Well, then they came out and said, you know what, no, we were wrong on that. We don't think it's 46 million. Now we think it's upwards of 90 million. And now what I thought was very interesting about this particular article, it said, at the very end, it said, but certain scientists and researchers from, I think it said Oxford, believe it could be 250 times that. 250 times 93 billion. I think I said million a minute ago. 93 billion light years across, and it might be 250 times that. Are you starting to see the problem? That the law of cause and effect that says you can't get something to pop into existence from nothing, and whatever the cause was has to be greater than the effect. What's greater than a universe that is 93 billion light years across, or 250 times that? What's bigger than that? I'll tell you what's not. A tiny singularity that's 10 to the negative 26 centimeters across, that's smaller than a period at the end of a sentence. That's not a scientific idea. You're told it is. It's put in textbooks like it's a scientific fact, but it's not. You've got to have something that's bigger than the universe that we have in order to be a legitimate cause for the universe, and a tiny singularity that pops into existence from nothing and explodes doesn't bring into existence a universe that's 93 billion light years across. What does? You've got to have something bigger than the universe. What's bigger than a 93 billion light year across universe? You have to have something that's infinitely big and powerful and has resources that don't get depleted. Well, what could that be? It's interesting to me that in Psalm 19, the text says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows His handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, night unto night utters knowledge. There is no language, no place where their voice is not heard." Here's what that simply means. You look up into the night sky if you live in Texas. You look up into the night sky if you live in Sierra Leone. You look up into the night sky if you live in Hawaii. You look up into the night sky if you live in the furthest part of Siberia. And you can see there is something bigger out there. And you can recognize that something bigger than that had to make it. And that's why when Paul wrote Romans chapter 1, he says, "Since the beginning of creation, God's invisible attributes are clearly understood, being understood by the things which are made, even His eternal," He's always had to be there, "power." Well, I mean, to get your cause for this universe, there's got to be something that's bigger than a 93 billion light year universe, and a tiny singularity doesn't do it. In fact, with all due respect, that's about as absurd as a suggestion as to how the universe got here as ever was put forth with a serious face. What could bring a universe the size of ours into existence? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So there you have, in the first sentence of the biblical text, a validation and scientifically accurate statement that is the only legitimate statement that could be made about the origin of the universe. Well, we're going to look at one more idea that you find there in Genesis chapter 1. Because with that statement from Charles Smith, he said, "In the beginning was matter," and then matter somehow, in his suggestion, just pops into existence from nothing, which we see that cannot be the case. But then he says, "And matter begot the amoeba." You know, he's saying that life pops into existence from non-living chemicals. Well, there's another law of science. It's called the law of biogenesis. Law of biogenesis simply says this: all life in this material universe comes from previously existing life of its own kind in nature. Simple to understand. All life in this material universe comes from previously existing life of its own kind in nature. Now, you know that to be the case. You know it intuitively. You know it let me show you how you know it. If I were to say, years ago, we had a dog, a really nice dog, really neat looking dog. It was a black dog that had come up to our house there in East Tennessee where I used to live. And that dog was going to have babies, and got ready for that dog to have babies, and she gave birth to 8 of the most beautiful baby horses you've ever seen. Well, of course she did not. Well, you weren't there. Okay, it wasn't baby horses, baby hippopotamuses. Well, no, absolutely not. What did my dog give birth to? Puppies. Every time. Dogs always give birth to puppies. Do you know there's not a single biological experiment in the history of the universe where a dog gave birth to something other than puppies? And if I were to say I walked into my backyard and 8 puppies popped into existence from the chemical properties of the concrete and the rain from the night before, well, you would know that's not a viable option for 8 puppies. 8 puppies appear because they have a mother who is a dog, and those puppies are born to that mother, and they don't pop into existence from non-living chemicals. But do you know that according to that evolutionary idea, in the beginning was matter, and matter begot the amoeba, you have to get life from non-living chemicals. In nature, that does not happen. It's impossible. People in the past thought it did. In fact, they said, hey, spontaneous generation happens all the time. You see life pop into existence from non-living chemicals. And people said, well, give me an example of it. They said, well, stick a T-bone steak on your kitchen counter in the middle of the summer and leave a window open and see what happens. Sure enough, maggots will spontaneously generate on that T-bone steak. You didn't see the maggots fall out of the sky. You didn't see the maggots crawl onto the steak. They just spontaneously generated on the steak. They said if that's not enough proof, go out to a place where there's some dampness, some water, and put a piece of a log there. It's got some bark, and come back in 3 months, pop that bark off that log, and guess what you'll see? There'll be worms and bugs and beetles. How'd they get there? Spontaneously generated, popped into existence from the chemical properties on that log and in conjunction with that water. Said if that's not enough, take some old sweaty rags, wrap them up in some wheat, put them in the corner of your barn, and come back in a month. Guess what spontaneously generates with the chemical properties of old sweaty rags and wheat? Said mice just pop into existence. Now there's a guy, Francisco Redi, or Redi, you spell his name R-E-D-I, that you'll read about in every single biological textbook that you ever read, at least the fundamental beginning stages of it. And they will explain to you that Redi thought, hey, look, this idea of spontaneous generation just doesn't happen. And so he took some jars and he put meat in this group of jars and he left them uncovered. Put meat in this group of jars and covered them, hermetically sealed them, airtight. Watched as flies landed on the uncovered meat. Flies tried to get on the covered meat. They couldn't. Maggots formed on the uncovered meat, didn't form on the covered meat. And he said, you know what? I think flies are producing maggots. Well, sure enough, the naysayers of his experiment said, no, spontaneous generation really occurs. Maggots pop into existence from nothing, but you didn't let air into the meat, and that's what causes spontaneous generation. And so he did another set of experiments where uncovered meat, covered meat, and then the middle group, he put a netting-like substance, like medical gauze. Flies landed on the uncovered meat, maggots. Flies tried to get in the covered meat, couldn't. Flies then landed on the netting substance, and maggots formed on the netting, but not on the meat. He said, I believe flies are producing maggots. They said, well, I guess you're right. But we still think other things spontaneously generate. And do you know, for another 200 years, people thought that. Until the mid-60s of the 1800s, 1865 or so, up to 1868, a man by the name of Louis Pasteur. You probably know his name, although you might not even know you know his name. If you were to take some milk out of your refrigerator and look on the side of it, it would say it's pasteurized. Well, what does it mean that your milk is pasteurized and your apple juice is pasteurized and your orange juice is pasteurized? Well, it means that the guy who invented the pasteurization process was named Louis Pasteur. And here's what he did. He boiled hay broth and meat broth, and in the 1860s they had microscopes, and you could look into that hay broth before it was boiled and you could see millions of swimming bacteria and little creatures. After you boiled that meat broth, it killed them all. Well, then he put them in a special S-shaped flask with a S-shaped neck so that air could get back in, but all of the microscopic organisms landed in the little curve of the S shape. Gravity pulled them down, and the air went back in for all the people who said you got to have air for spontaneous generation. But he would then look a day later, no microscopic organisms. A week later, I understand that several of those lasted a year, and there were not any microscopic organisms. When he broke the neck off and the air went straight back down, well, then there would be microscopic organisms, bacteria and the like. And so what he proved in 1860 is bacteria doesn't pop into existence from non-living chemicals. It comes into existence from other bacteria of their own kind. You can't make the jump. In the beginning was matter, and matter begot the amoeba, because it is a violation of the most fundamental biological law in existence anywhere. There's never been an exception to it. That's why it's a law. Life comes from previously existing life of its own kind in nature. Now, according to in the beginning was matter, and matter begot the amoeba, and the amoeba begot the fish, etc., not only did it pop into existence from non-living chemicals, which is a violation of the law of biogenesis, but then it changed from one kind of organism to another kind of organism. Evolution says that the amoeba begot the worm begot the fish. All of those came from one single kind, but that would mean they would have to give birth to something other than their kind. That doesn't happen. It's never happened. It's biologically impossible for it to happen. Do you know, if you're just taking the science of it, here's what you know. In this material universe, life comes from previously existing life of its own kind. You know what dogs always do? They always give birth to puppies. Cats always give birth to kittens. Monkeys always give birth to other monkeys. They don't ever give birth to anything other than a monkey. No half monkey, half human. No sub-monkey or super monkey. It's always just a monkey. Now, where did that kind of a law come from? We're right here in Genesis chapter 1, remember? And in Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning, God fulfilled the scientific criteria, all of them, for the law of cause and effect. And then, to get life into existence, God speaks life into existence. It doesn't come from natural processes, from non-living chemicals to life. God speaks it into existence, and then, what's interesting about that, as you look at it, it says, and God created, you look right there in verse 11 and 12 of Genesis chapter 1. And the earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields seed according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit according to its kind, because God said, one verse above, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind. Do you mean to tell me that the most fundamental physical law, the law of cause and effect, and the most fundamental biological law, the law of biogenesis, are both mentioned and hammered down and nailed down and hammered out in Genesis chapter 1? Absolutely. You know, when you look at it, the Bible contains everything we need to know about spiritual truth, and the Bible contains the physical truth as to how we got here. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And God said, let there be light. And then He told all the living creatures to multiply after their own kind when He brought life supernaturally into existence. Those are scientific statements that can be validated when put up next to the most fundamental laws of science in existence today. There again, in the beginning, God is the most scientific statement you'll ever read.